Today's scripture comes from the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verses 1 through 18, found on page 276 of your Pew Bible. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Euphrates and from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Oprah, the other Ruth. After they had lived about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you, as you have shown your dead, and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." At this, they all wept again. Then Oprah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look, Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Home. What's that mean to you? Home's a concept that we all have somewhere in our minds, and we long for. We welcome. We want to discover. We want to nurture. We want to sustain. We want to construct this sense of home, well-being. I'd like to ask you, in your mind, what makes a home a home? When you think of home, where does that lead you? Is it a place that we identify ourselves with? For me, that's Jamestown, New York. It's where everything I learned about there before going to college. And when I think of Jamestown, I think of home. It's the place I come from. It's where I was hewn. It didn't have all the glitz and glamour of a big city. For Naomi, home was Bethlehem. It wasn't Jerusalem. It wasn't Rome. It wasn't some big place. It was simply a small town. It was a place she was familiar with. But there she had a sense of belonging. She was known there. She was loved there. She had carved out a place where she understood how that worked and how she fit into it. For Naomi, home was Bethlehem. By the way, Bethlehem means the house of bread. It's where she got her sustenance from. Home isn't just a place, though. Home is a people. It's of all the hundreds and thousands of people, it's those people that you share your intimate life with. You feel free to say, I dare to dream this, or I'm afraid of that, or my grandmother makes me feel so special. When we need to vent, these are the people we cry with. These are the people we complain to. When disaster strikes, these are the people who come and care about us and feed us and take us into their care. Now, Ruth was Naomi's daughter-in-law, but she came to have such an affection for Naomi that Ruth thought, home isn't Moab, where I grew up. Home is where Naomi is. And so she was willing to leave Moab, though everything familiar was there, because Naomi was determined to go back to her home of Bethlehem. So her thought was, it's more than just a place. It's who do you want to share your future with? And she couldn't see her future without loving and being loved and taking care of Naomi. Home is that port of protection, that provision. Home is that haven, that refuge. It's where living happens. It's where children learn what to believe in, who to trust in, what values and what priority. It's where education happens at bedtimes. Culture is taught and caught at home. Home is that safe place where all of us long to experience, where we can retreat. No matter what happens out in the world, we can close our front door and we can have this sense of belonging and safety, and we re-energize and we are able to feel secure so that tomorrow morning we can open the door and go back and battle the world, knowing that we have a place that is safe to return to. Now, we're not going to get into this guy until next week, but Boaz became that kind of port of protection for Ruth and Naomi. He provided that sense of safety, that sense of you're going to be okay because I am going to take care of you. All right, the philosopher is coming out in me for right now, so philosophize with me, okay? I'm not sure where I began to link the story of Ruth, which is a wonderful romantic story, with the sense of home and this other word I'm going to use. I kind of think it was when we went to the Right Now Media conference or convention in Chicago, but there was a lady that was talking about Ruth, and I think this is where that comes from. But she talked about, I believe, anyhow, it's in my mind, about this concept called homeostasis. It's a physiological thing that happens as a way of life within us. Homeostasis, homeo means same. Stasis means still. And our bodies are determined to meet challenges or change or threats or danger by readjusting our internal processes in order to find a way to return to normalcy. So, if the body is cold, if part of the body is cold, if you put an ice pack on your arm, other parts of the body will make up for that part that is cold, and it will sort of all go working to overcome or compensate for that change. And in order to return to normal, so that even if part of your body is cold, your body temperature can remain stable. Well, this happens not just with body temperature, it happens with all kinds of different things, blood pressure and many different things. And so how does change and normality work itself out? You see, in all of our lives, there will be change, some wonderful change, some uninvited change. But when that happens, there are forces that will go to work so that you have something stable, so that your life isn't all the time only having the drama of change and change and change. God seems to put within our body this sense of compensating. By the way, this homeostasis doesn't only happen within the body when there's an infection or something. It also happens in leadership. When swift change occurs, all kinds of agents determine to find a new normal. It happens in social and psychological and even spiritual settings and ways. There's an interplay between status quo and change. And no matter how much change there is, equilibrium, even if it's the new equilibrium, has to be established to maintain health or to return to health once that has been compromised. So for our conversation concerning Ruth and Naomi, I want to say home is the place where homeostasis happens and is restored. I tell you, this is a big, bad world. There are all kinds of things that happen, and how sad when it happens in the home, because then where do you go? Where do you go? How do you establish that? But maybe we need to brush up on this Old Testament story of Ruth. First of all, the book of the Bible before Ruth is Judges. Judges is the period of time in history when the story, the personal story of Ruth happened. And Judges is a time where they lacked leadership. And there might be a little localized leader here or there, but for the most part, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. They just thought of themselves. And it didn't make for a solid, stable, homeostasis kind of an atmosphere to live in. But in the midst of Judges, when people were not following God closely, we see that there were individuals who did. Naomi was one of them. And when we begin this personal story, it's funny how we've got Ruth and then we've got Esther. And these are two personal stories about what happened during this time. But anyhow, here's how we begin. Naomi was married to Elimelech. They owned property. They had place. They had position. They had belonging. And even if everything wasn't perfect, they had two children. By the way, Naomi means delight or pleasant. If Naomi was in a room and you were in that room, you couldn't help but notice Naomi. She just was pleasant and delightful. Elimelech, his name means, my God is king. He was really a man who loved God, we believe. And they lived, again, in Bethlehem, where the house of bread, and they had enough. And they envisioned serving God together with their two sons. Mahlon, which names mean something, and Mahlon means sickly, and Kilion means wasting away. So they had some probably struggles. Maybe they had some health concerns for their children, but for the most part, they no doubt overcame, and they provided a safe haven for their children, even if life wasn't perfect. But Bethlehem became un-Bethlehem. There was no bread. There was a famine. And because of Elimelech and Naomi wanting to provide for their family, they felt the only way to do it is to relocate. Why they relocated to Moab, I don't understand. Moab was not a nice place, but it probably had a good harvest at this time. And as long as they had each other, they probably thought we can endure a pagan environment around us. It's not like the land of Israel was following God closely. So in this new area of Moab, no doubt, Naomi and her husband Elimelech gave it their all. They tried their best. But they were trying to establish an equilibrium after the famine. And wouldn't you know it, their sons fell in love with Moabite women. Oh, that must have been a challenge at first. You know, that's kind of one of the fears of moving to a different place that doesn't honor the same God. I don't really know if Mahlon and Kilion remained true to their faith or didn't. We're unclear. But Mahlon married Ruth. Kilion married Orpah. And somehow Naomi came, whether it was immediate or whether it took time, she came to fall in love with her daughter-in-laws. She thought they were wonderful. Whether they became people of faith because they saw how Naomi lived or not, I'm uncertain. But I know this. We know that Ruth followed Jehovah. And we know that she was a woman of integrity. She was loyal. She was there for her husband. She was part of the family, and it was a great thing. Well, guess what? Elimelech died. Now, Naomi had two sons to comfort her. But it was nevertheless a deep, deep loss. Mahlon and Kilion, one after the other, die. And now Naomi has a daughter-in-law, Ruth, and a daughter-in-law, Orpah. But you have three women in a culture where you needed a man in order to have life and a sense of security. Their homeostasis was threatened big time. And they could easily give way to panic and fear and despair. And so in this place where Naomi didn't feel like it was home anymore, it wasn't safe, it wasn't comfortable, and everything she looked at, all she could think of is my husband, my son, my son. And anyone she would turn to other than her daughter-in-laws for comfort lived in Bethlehem. And Bethlehem no longer had a famine. It'd been a decade. So she determined in her bitterness that she was going to go home. And she realized these Moabite daughter-in-laws, they have a better chance of getting remarried and establishing a new normal here than with me. They don't belong there. I belong there. And so she said, I love you, but you have no reason to go with me. And Orpah thought, that makes sense. I have my family here and everything. Nothing against Orpah. She was loyal, she was devoted, she was wonderful. But she decided to stay back. But it says that Ruth would not let go of Naomi's legs. And she says, I can't do it. I can't see my future without you. Whether it was because she knew that it's dangerous for Naomi to travel alone, or whether she thought that I really depend on her. But whatever it was, Ruth felt home is more about being with her than not. And she said this thing that I quoted, or I didn't quote, but was part of our wedding ceremony yesterday. Ruth said, and this wasn't a husband and a wife, this is a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. But Ruth said to her mother-in-law, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely if anything other than death separates you and me. And so Naomi and Ruth set out for that long, arduous trip home. Naomi returning to homeostasis, and Ruth courageous enough to face the unknown future because she is certain of her mother-in-law's love for her. And when they arrive in Bethlehem, things are about ready to improve. But they just so happen to arrive during barley harvest. And Ruth is probably flabbergasted because when Naomi walked into town, everybody seemed to, Naomi is back! Naomi wasn't forgotten. Naomi was beloved. And it was like a celebrity returning home. Oh, Naomi, delightful Naomi, pleasant Naomi. And Naomi says, I'm back, but I have a new name. You call me bitter, because the Lord has dealt with me harshly, not only in the famine, but also in the loss of my husband, in the loss of my only 2 sons. Call me Mara, which means bitter. Well, we are going to see next week how Naomi's bitterness is answered by the love of God. And so I invite you to come next week to see how this bitterness becomes a blessing as they just so happen to find God's intervention.